Growing older alone, a new reality. I've gone through many changes over the years, and as someone who lives alone, I believe I can offer a valuable perspective on the challenges and joys of this phase of life. 1. Aging alone, a new reality. You know, when I was young, families were different. I remember my grandparents' house always full of uncles, cousins, and neighbors. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning, conversations that stretched into the afternoon, children running around in the backyard. It was a time when doors were always open to welcome visitors. Today, living alone in my apartment in downtown Chicago, I realize how drastically things have changed. My only daughter lives abroad, and although we video chat every week, it's not the same as having someone nearby. Technology helps, but it doesn't replace human warmth, a tight hug, or even that cup of coffee shared in silence. Many of my friends are in the same situation. Sarah, my 80-year-old neighbor, never married or had children. It was her choice. She focused on her career as a university professor. She tells me that sometimes she wonders if she made the right choice, but then she smiles and talks about the thousands of students who have passed through her life, many of whom still visit her occasionally. Tom, whom I always meet in the park during my morning walks, has 3 children, but they all live in different states. He jokes that he's become an expert in video calls, but admits that he misses hugging his grandchildren. Our new reality has forced us to be creative. We've created small informal communities. The neighbors in the building have become family, friends from the park have become confidants, and even the local shopkeepers have become an important part of our support network. Mr. Johnson, the doorman, always lets me know when I'm expecting a delivery. Mrs. Thompson at the pharmacy knows all my prescriptions by heart and calls me when it's time to renew them. It's different from what we imagined for our old age, but we're slowly learning to build new types of bonds, to find comfort in different forms of companionship. Sometimes I find myself thinking about how it would be if we had prepared better for this reality, maybe chosen to live closer to each other, or created planned communities to grow old together. But as my friend Eleanor says, there's no point in thinking about what could have been. We have to make the best of what we have now. 2. Different cultures, different approaches. I have a Japanese friend, Hiro, whom I met during Tai Chi classes in the park. He's lived in the United States for 40 years, but maintains many of the customs from his homeland. Whenever we talk, he tells me how different the treatment of the elderly is in Japan. There, it's a tradition for the oldest children to take care of their aging parents. It's not just a matter of choice, but a deeply rooted cultural responsibility. John, he often tells me, in Japan, it would be unthinkable to leave parents living alone. He tells me stories of how Japanese houses are built with multiple generations in mind, with specific spaces for grandparents. Grandchildren grow up learning from the wisdom of their elders, and there's immense respect for the experience that comes with age. The other day, during our monthly breakfast at Joe's Diner, a tradition we've kept for 5 years, Hiro showed me photos of his family in Japan. I saw images of 3 generations living under the same roof, sharing meals, celebrations, and everyday life. I confess I felt a twinge of envy, but I also realized that each culture has its own ways of dealing with aging. For example, my Italian neighbor, Mrs. Rossi, tells me that in her homeland, it's still common to see entire families living in the same neighborhood, sometimes even in the same building. Sunday lunches are sacred, and there's always a table full of grandchildren, nephews, and cousins. Here she had to adapt to a different reality, but she keeps the tradition alive by making homemade pasta for the neighbors every weekend. But I also see the positive side of our independence. In the senior group I attend, we often discuss how we've learned to manage on our own. I cook my own food. I even learned to make bread during the pandemic, take care of the house, manage my finances. Eleanor, who also participates in the group, says she never imagined that at 78 she would be taking online courses and paying bills on her cell phone. 3. Medicine has advanced. Now what? It's impressive how medicine has evolved in recent decades. When I was a child, I didn't know any of my grandparents. They passed away relatively young, with problems that today would be easily treatable. My paternal grandfather, for example, passed away at 60 due to uncontrolled hypertension. Today, at 75, I take blood pressure medication that allows me to lead a completely normal life. I do water aerobics 3 times a week at the neighborhood gym, an activity that a few decades ago would have been considered inappropriate for someone my age. Our class has people from 65 to 85, all active and willing. The instructor, Amanda, always comments on how inspiring our energy in the pool is, especially when we have our competition of who can do the most laps in 15 minutes. I also participate in a walking group in the park. Every Saturday, religiously at 7 a.m., we meet to do 3 laps around the park, followed by a collective breakfast. Dr. Richards, my cardiologist, says my test results are better than many 40-year-olds out there, and that fills me with pride. However, I also see the other side of the coin. My friend Albert, 82, developed Alzheimer's 2 years ago. At first, it was small, forgetful moments that everyone overlooked. An unpaid bill, a stove left on, a missed appointment. As he lived alone, the situation got increasingly complicated. The neighbors took turns helping, but there came a point when it was no longer safe for him to continue alone. Now Albert is in a nursing home. I visit him every Thursday, always bringing a caramel pudding he loves. Sometimes he recognizes me, sometimes he doesn't, but he always smiles when he sees me. The medical team is attentive, but it's not the same as being at home. This situation made me think a lot about my own future. I started doing crossword puzzles daily and signed up for a painting course. They say keeping the mind active helps prevent cognitive problems. Another important advance is medical technology. I use a smartwatch that monitors my heart rate and reminds me to take my medications. My daughter installed an app that's connected to the watch. If anything is out of the ordinary, she's immediately notified. At first I thought it was overkill, but it's already saved me twice when I had blood pressure spikes and hadn't noticed. 4. Men and women, different experiences. The difference in how men and women experience aging became very clear to me after Mary, my wife, passed away 5 years ago. In the first few months, I felt completely lost. I had never needed to cook anything beyond a fried egg, didn't know which product to use to clean the bathroom, and the first time I tried to iron a shirt was a real disaster. I still have the burn mark on my finger to prove it. Mrs. Cecilia, my neighbor who is also a widow, helped me a lot during this phase. She laughed at my disastrous attempts in the kitchen and ended up teaching me some basic recipes. "John," she would say, "men also have to learn to fend for themselves. You can't depend on others your whole life." In return, I helped her organize her finances. Her husband had always taken care of that part, and she found herself lost with bills, investments, and tax returns. In our senior group, the difference is striking. Women are the majority and seem to adapt better to solitude. They organize afternoon teas, do crafts together, exchange recipes and confidences. They've even formed an amateur theater group. We men take longer to open up, to create bonds. That's why I started attending a chess club downtown. There I found other men in the same situation, retirees, some widowers, all seeking male companionship and conversations about politics, sports, and history. Between moves on the chessboard, we ended up creating strong bonds. Charlie, my regular chess partner, says these meetings saved him from depression after he retired. Women also face their own unique challenges. Mrs. Marlene from the water aerobics group always comments on how difficult it is to live on a smaller pension, the result of years working informally or earning less than men. Many were financially dependent on their husbands and, when they pass away, need to learn to manage the little they have. On the other hand, they seem more emotionally prepared for solitude. They have an easier time expressing feelings, asking for help when they need it, and maintaining deep friendships. We men often keep everything inside until we can't take it anymore. It took a lot of insistence from my doctor for me to start seeing a psychologist after Mary passed away. 5. We need changes in services. The other day I needed to go to the health clinic to renew my prescriptions. I left home at 6 a.m. because I was told that they start distributing numbers at 7 a.m. The bus was late, of course. When it finally arrived, it was packed, and no one got up to offer me a seat, despite my grey hair and the cane I use on rainy days because of arthritis. I arrived at the clinic at 6:45 a.m., but there was already a huge line. I stood for almost an hour until I got a number. The doctor only started seeing patients at 9 a.m., and my appointment was at 11 a.m. It was 5 hours fasting, sitting in an uncomfortable chair just for a routine consultation that didn't even last 15 minutes. This made me think about how our public services are not prepared to serve the elderly population. Why isn't there an efficient scheduling system? Why isn't there a specific time for senior care? A dedicated transportation service would make all the difference, like those offered by some private hospitals. I live in an old building without an elevator. Luckily, I'm on the first floor, but I see the difficulty of neighbors on the upper floors. Mrs. Carmen on the third floor hardly leaves her house anymore because the stairs are too tiring for her. The building manager even proposed installing an elevator, but the cost would be very high, and not all residents agreed to make the investment. The housing issue is crucial. My friend Robert had to move after falling in the bathroom. His house didn't have support bars, the floor was slippery, and the doors were too narrow for a wheelchair. He ended up moving to an adapted apartment, but paying a much higher rent. As he says, getting old is too expensive in this country. 6. Dealing with finances. Finances. This is a subject that keeps me up at night more than any other. I worked as an accountant for 40 years, always careful with money, but even so it's sometimes tight. My pension, which seemed decent when I retired 15 years ago, barely covers basic expenses today. Health insurance increases every year above inflation. Medications are getting more expensive. And then there are the normal day-to-day expenses. Every month is a real financial gymnastics. I write down every cent I spend in a little notebook, an old habit I've kept since I was young. On the first page, I list all fixed expenses: condo fees, electricity, water, phone, health insurance, medications. On the second, variable expenses: food, transportation, leisure. What's left, when there is anything left, I save for emergencies. I'm lucky to own my apartment. It was an investment I made when I was young, working 2 jobs to manage the payments. But I see friends who pay rent, and the situation is much more complicated. Joe, my domino partner, spends almost his entire pension on rent and medication. To supplement his income, he sells sweets that his daughter makes: brigadeiros, coconut candy, peanut brittle. At first he was embarrassed, but gradually realized there's no shame in working, regardless of age. Helen, a lady I met in the senior group, found a creative solution. She rented out 2 rooms in her house to college students. In addition to extra income, she gained company and help with heavier tasks. The boys help me carry groceries, change light bulbs, and even teach me how to use my cell phone better, she says with a smile. Another serious problem is access to credit. Banks don't like lending money to retirees, even if it's for a medical emergency. When my refrigerator broke down last year, I had to turn to my daughter, something that left me quite embarrassed. There are payroll loans, it's true, but the interest rates are very high and many friends have already fallen into financial traps out of desperation. 7. Loneliness is our biggest enemy. You know what's hardest? It's Sundays. During the week I have my activities: water aerobics on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, walking group on Tuesday and Thursday, chess on Saturdays. But Sunday is an endless day when you live alone. The morning is still okay. I wake up early out of habit, make my coffee, read the newspaper. Yes, I still prefer the printed newspaper. Watch a bit of television. But after lunch, when silence takes over the building and the hours seem to drag on, loneliness hits hard. Sometimes I turn on the TV just to have background noise, a human voice in the environment. On particularly difficult days, I take out the old photo album and allow myself a few tears of longing. It was on one of these Sunday afternoons that I had an idea: create a WhatsApp group with some friends from the building. At first, there were only 5 of us: me, Mrs. Cecilia, Mr. Albert before Alzheimer's, Mrs. Mary and Mr. Joe. We agreed to meet every Sunday afternoon to play cards. Everyone brings something for the snack: a cake, cookies, coffee. Gradually, the group grew. Today we are 12 people, and our Sunday meetings have become the highlight of the week. Technology, which many people say keeps people apart, has been an important connection tool for us. My daughter taught me how to use Zoom during the pandemic, and now I video call her every week. I see my grandchildren growing up. Even if through the screen, it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. I even learned to send funny stickers on WhatsApp, something that greatly amuses my domino group friends. There's also the virtual book club we participate in. Me and 6 other friends meet online once a month to discuss the chosen book. Beatrice, who lives in Phoenix, I met through this group. She's 82 and has contagious energy. Loneliness only wins if we let it, she always says. 8. Planning for the future, or lack thereof. I confess it took me a while to accept that I needed to plan better for the future. It was only after I saw what happened to Albert that I decided to take some precautions. Seeing such a close friend gradually losing memory and independence was a painful wake-up call. I started by organizing all my documents. I bought a large folder, one of those with dividers, and separated everything: personal documents, deeds, insurance policies, banking information, medical prescriptions. I made a detailed document with all my passwords for the bank, email, social media, and left it with my daughter. I also listed all the medications I take with schedules and dosages. The hardest part was making the will. No one likes to think about their own death, but it's necessary. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer specializing in succession law, Mr. Peterson, who is also elderly and understands our concerns well. He helped me organize everything clearly and legally. I left a power of attorney for my daughter with specific instructions about medical care in case I can no longer make decisions. I also researched nursing homes, not that I want to go to one now, but it's good to know the options. I visited several institutions, talked to residents and staff. Some are like luxury hotels with prices impossible for most retirees. Others are simpler, but well cared for and welcoming. I made a list of the ones I liked best, with pros and cons of each. The most important thing was to start saving a little extra money every month. It's not much. Sometimes just $50, other times $100, but little by little it forms a reserve for emergencies. As my friend Teresa says, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. 9. Changes in communities. I remember when I was young, everyone knew each other in the neighborhood. The corner bakery, where Mr. Manuel would keep bread on credit for those who needed it. He knew each family by name and knew exactly how much each one could pay at the end of the month. Tony's Bar, a meeting point on Sunday afternoons, where men played pool and discussed football, while children played on the sidewalk. The church, where families gathered not only to pray but to organize bazaars, run clothing drives, help those in need. The other day I passed by the old bakery. Now it's a convenience store of a big chain. Everything automated. Employees who change every month, no one knows each other by name. Tony's Bar became a pharmacy, also part of a chain. The church is still there, but the masses are increasingly empty and the bazaars are over. Security issues, they say. People barely greet each other in the elevator, always in a hurry, looking at their cell phones. When I try to make conversation, many seem suspicious. "Do you need something, sir?" they ask, as if casual conversation was something suspicious. But not all is lost. There are still some points of light in our community. The Senior Community Center, for example, is a real oasis. There we offer and participate in craft workshops, dance classes, health lectures. Last week, I gave a lecture on financial education. I used my experience as an accountant to help other seniors better organize their finances. The square where I meet friends to play dominoes also resists the test of time. Every late afternoon, religiously, we gather there. The young people who run by with their headphones sometimes stop to watch our games. Some even get interested in learning, like Lucas, Mrs. Marlene's grandson, who now shows up every Saturday to play with us. 10. The importance of friendships. The friendships I've made in recent years are true gifts. There's the Domino Group, which started with 4 people and today has more than 10 regular players. The Water Aerobics friends, Claire, Nancy and Joan, who formed an informal support group with me. The chess partners from the club, especially Charlie, who has become a confidant. We help each other as we can. When Charlie had to have knee surgery, we organized a schedule to visit him in the hospital and later at home. Everyone brought a different meal, so he wouldn't have to worry about food during recovery. Nancy, who's a former nurse, helped with the dressings. I took care of the bills and health insurance paperwork. When Mrs. Marlene broke her arm last year, we also mobilized. She lives alone and needed help even for the most basic tasks. We made a list of tasks and each one took on a responsibility. Grocery shopping, cleaning the house, accompanying her to medical appointments. Was it tiring? Yes, but we know that one day it might be us needing that help. It's not the same as having family nearby, it's true. But we formed a kind of chosen family. We celebrate birthdays together. Everyone brings a dish, we make cake, we sing happy birthday. During end-of-year holidays, those who have nowhere to go gather at someone's house. Last Christmas, there were 15 people in my living room. Each one brought a memento of their family tradition. Mrs. Rossi's panettone, Mrs. Cecilia's turkey, Mr. Manuel's Portuguese sweets. 11. New housing arrangements. Recently, I learned about an interesting concept, shared housing for seniors. A friend from the walking group, Regina, moved to one of these communities after selling her big house. Her children were grown and she felt very lonely in that huge space. They're individual apartments but with common areas where residents can socialize. There's a game room, library, gym adapted for seniors, community garden. The most interesting thing is that there's always someone nearby in case of an emergency. Regina is loving it. She says it's like having privacy and company at the same time. She invited me to visit the place last week. I was impressed with the organization. Each resident has their own space with a kitchen and living room, but they can use the common areas whenever they want. There's even a weekly schedule of activities: yoga on Monday, movie afternoon on Wednesday, bingo on Friday. The cost isn't low, but for those who can afford it, it seems an excellent alternative. I confess I've been thinking about it. My apartment sometimes seems too big for just one person. Maintenance is work and the bills keep increasing. The idea of having neighbors in the same situation whom I can count on is tempting, but it's a big decision that requires a lot of financial and emotional planning. 12. Technology, friend or foe. I remember when the first computer arrived at the accounting firm where I worked. It was a huge machine that occupied half a room and did calculations that today any smartphone can do in seconds. At the time I thought, this will never catch on. How wrong I was. Today, at 75, I find myself navigating a world that sometimes seems alien to me. My smartphone has more functions than I can count, and every week my grandchildren try to teach me a new app. I've learned to use online banking, something that terrified me at first, but now I find incredibly practical. No more standing in line at the bank to pay bills. Social media is another universe I'm still trying to understand. My daughter insisted I create a Facebook account to see photos of the grandchildren. It's nice, but sometimes I feel overwhelmed by the amount of information. And don't even get me started on Twitter. I tried for a week and gave up. As my friend Tom says, it's like everyone's shouting and no one's listening. But I have to admit, technology has brought many benefits. The video calls with my daughter and grandchildren are a highlight of my week. I can see their faces, hear their laughter, almost feel like I'm there with them. During the pandemic, these calls were a lifeline, keeping us connected when we couldn't be physically together. I've also discovered the world of online courses. Last month, I completed a course on Renaissance art, something I've always been interested in, but never had time to study. It's amazing to be able to learn from experts around the world without leaving my living room. However, I worry about those who don't have access to this technology or struggle to use it. My neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, doesn't have a computer or smartphone. During the pandemic, she felt incredibly isolated. We tried to teach her to use a tablet, but she found it too confusing. It made me realize how this digital divide can further isolate older people who are already vulnerable to loneliness. 13. The importance of purpose. One of the biggest challenges of retirement I've found is maintaining a sense of purpose. For decades, our jobs defined us, gave structure to our days. Suddenly, all that disappears, and we're left wondering, what now? I've seen friends struggle with this. Tom, who was a high-powered executive, fell into a deep depression after retiring. He felt useless, like the world had moved on without him. It took him almost 2 years to find his footing again. For me, the transition was a bit easier. I'd always had hobbies, gardening, reading, playing chess. But even so, I felt a void. That's when I started volunteering at the local library. Twice a week, I read stories to children. It's become one of the highlights of my week. The children's enthusiasm is contagious, and I feel like I'm contributing something valuable to the community. I've also started mentoring young accountants. It's fulfilling to pass on the knowledge I've accumulated over decades, and I learn from them too. They keep me updated on the latest in technology and business practices. My friend Eleanor found her purpose in advocacy. She's become a fierce defender of senior rights, speaking at city council meetings and organizing petitions for better senior services. Just because we're old doesn't mean we're invisible, she often says. I think that's the key, finding something that makes you feel valuable, that gets you out of bed in the morning with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. It doesn't have to be grand or world-changing. For some, it might be babysitting grandchildren. For others, it could be volunteering at an animal shelter or teaching English to immigrants. The important thing is to keep engaging with the world, to keep learning and growing. Age may slow our bodies, but it doesn't have to dim our curiosity or dull our ability to contribute. 14. Reflections on a life lived. As I approach my 76th birthday, I find myself reflecting more and more on the life I've lived. It's been a journey full of ups and downs, joys and sorrows, triumphs and disappointments. But isn't that what life is all about? I look at the photos on my wall, my wedding day, the birth of my daughter, family vacations, work achievements. Each image tells a story, represents a chapter in my life. Some make me smile, others bring a tear to my eye, but I wouldn't change any of it. Sure, there are things I wish I'd done differently. I wish I'd spent more time with my family when I was younger, less focused on climbing the corporate ladder. I wish I'd traveled more, seen more of the world before my knees started protesting every long walk. I wish I'd told my wife, "I love you," more often before she passed away. But there's no use dwelling on regrets. Instead, I try to focus on the wisdom those experiences have given me. I've learned the value of patience, the importance of forgiveness, the power of kindness. I've learned that life rarely goes according to plan, but that's okay. Sometimes the detours lead to the most beautiful destinations. I've also learned that it's never too late to start something new. Last year, at 75, I took up painting. I'm not very good at it, but it brings me joy, and that's what matters. Who knows, maybe by 80, I'll have my first exhibition. As I look to the future, I feel a mix of anticipation and trepidation. I know there will be more challenges ahead, health issues perhaps, or the loss of more friends. But I also know there will be more moments of joy, more opportunities to learn and grow, more chances to make a difference in someone's life. And isn't that what it's all about? Not just surviving, but truly living right up until the end, making each day count, leaving the world a little better than we found it. That's my goal now, as I navigate this final chapter of my life, to live fully, love deeply, and leave a legacy of kindness and wisdom for those who come after me. As the sun sets on another day, I'm grateful for the life I've lived and excited for whatever tomorrow may bring. Because as long as we're here, there's always the possibility of a new adventure, a new friendship, a new discovery. And that, my friends, is what keeps me going.